Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko ahau te kai whakaheere o teo mo te Sustainable Business Council. Kia ora everyone, my name's Kate Alcock. I'm the Manager of Climate for the Sustainable Business Council. And thanks for joining us here today. Welcome to the Becker Building. Rupert and Genevieve, thanks so much for hosting us. And also a really warm welcome to Richard and Ant from Becker's procurement team. A really special welcome to those joining us on live stream. It's great to have you with us today. So the aim of today's session is to bring procurement managers and sustainability managers together to talk about sustainable procurement and give you some examples of how it fits in the procurement process. And we're going to run today in three main parts. So I'll briefly set the scene, talking about the biggest drivers for integrating sustainability into procurement. And then I'll highlight some topical issues that we're seeing play out globally and are starting to turn up here in New Zealand as well. I'll talk about SBC's experiences with sustainable procurement. So the first was the work we did with our freight efficiency group to develop sustainable freight procurement guidelines. The second piece of work that I'll talk a bit less about is the work we did with Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment last year when we worked on the joint procurement process for electric vehicles. And then following that, we're really fortunate to have Kerry Hannafin from Countdown here today. She's going to share some of their business's sustainable procurement initiatives. And then we'll workshop with you three scenarios as to where you think your business is at in terms of sustainable procurement. So whether that's you just want to get started, or you've started but you want to go next level, or you've already got some quite sophisticated integration happening and you want to talk to others about it. So we'll work through each of those scenarios and give you some opportunities and some of the tools that are available to help you. And we'll make sure that you get all the slides, all the notes, and all the links later this week. So don't feel like you need to furiously scribble everything down. So just before I get into the overview, I'd like to ask, via a show of hands, how many of you in the room are supply chain or procurement managers? Awesome. Okay. So for live stream, that was probably roughly half of the audience. And how many of you are sustainability managers who are working closely with those parts of the business? Okay, so roughly about a quarter of you. And how many of you are from businesses where you don't necessarily have a dedicated procurement person? There are probably lots of different things that you have to do and work on. Yeah, okay. Well, welcome to you all. So we're really privileged to have you all together in one place. And from SBC's experience working with over 100 members, it's really rare for people with procurement in their roles to actually be able to come together. So it's great that today we'll be able to talk through the big picture, and we're really looking forward to hearing your perspectives. So as sustainable business practice continues to evolve and mature, we're seeing it become more and more integrated into everyday business practice. And that means our liaison delegates, sustainability managers, project managers, technical experts are working more closely with different business units to look for opportunities to strengthen sustainability outcomes. And there's an increasing focus on how you connect the dots on strategies, functions, and performance to get the most value for your business. And value is increasingly understood as meaning beyond profit. So it's more and more apparent how much procurement touches on so many aspects of the business directly and indirectly. We know that business is really good at thinking about how it spends its money. Make sure you're paying a really good price for the products and services that you purchase. But sustainable procurement goes that bit further. It looks at how purchasing processes can strengthen or add value. The survey of members that we conducted in June saw sustainable procurement ranked as the highest trend that members say will impact them in the next 2 to 3 years. And demonstrating how you're influencing sustainability in your supply chain is really important to all SBC members because it's one of our member commitments. You have to show that you're doing it within 3 years of becoming a member. And our direct experiences of developing procurement processes were quite different. They were both quite different. And they both made me appreciate two main things. Number one, every procurement process is different. And number two, every procurement process is different. So today, we can't give you a silver bullet that's going to cut through all of your challenges with a single shot. But what we'll try and do is cover as much as we can and work together on what we think some of the pressing issues might be. So at SBC, when we talk about sustainable procurement, we do so in the context of the business's entire value chain. And this refers to the full life cycle of a product or a process. The upstream value chain includes material sourcing and production, while the downstream value chain covers the product's consumption and the disposal or recycling process that follows by you or your customers. So sustainable procurement happens upstream. It applies to the purchase of any goods or service in the supply chain. And members are realizing the power of the supply chain to drive their own sustainability practices and also how it can be used to influence the behaviors of their own suppliers. I find it really interesting that usually when you ask a procurement manager how many suppliers they've got, even they raise their eyebrows and say, oh, a couple of thousand? You don't really think that you do touch that many businesses through your procurement process, but yeah, it's significant. So there's growing interest in strengthening sustainability and procurement due to a number of factors. These are just a few. So there is economic benefit to be made from targeting efficiencies and optimizing savings through using resources more efficiently. Consumer expectation is a large one. In June, when we did our survey, consumers' shifting expectations was ranked as the third highest trend that will have an impact on SBC members in the next 2 to 3 years. And increasingly, consumers and procurers are considering the ethical reputation of a business when choosing to purchase a product or a service. Businesses are reliant on the reputation of their brand, especially if they supply to consumer markets. And if the media or the public expose misleading information, unethical behavior, or negative environmental impacts, trust in a brand will be seriously affected. And the example that we were going to highlight was in May. The clothing brand World were accused of misleading customers about where its clothes were made. So they were the first fashion brand to be endorsed by the United Nations, and they'd been really vocal about the importance of making their clothes in New Zealand and not supporting brands that made their clothes in sweatshops overseas. But a media investigation found out that materials of World's clothing were sourced from Bangladesh and China. It turned out that the main clothing tag itself that said made in New Zealand was actually made in New Zealand, but other parts of the t-shirt were sourced from other countries. And it was very public, and some people have lost trust in the brand, which is really hard to get back. So legislation, even if it's outside New Zealand, it's expected that a large number of New Zealand businesses operating in Australia will directly be affected by the Australian Modern Slavery Act. An Ernst & Young report estimated that 500 New Zealand businesses will be affected by this federal bill, and the Act is expected to be in place this year, so this is a very immediate issue. Management of trade and investment risk plays out. A number of countries that New Zealand exports to have trade regulations that prohibit the production of goods using forced labour. Allegations of forced labour in the supply chain will result in seizure of the goods by the public authorities, cause significant disruption to the continuity of your production process. And investors also recognise the risk that allegations pose. Even rumours of labour rights breaches can jeopardise relationships with investors and endanger the accessibility of public funds. Finally, government procurement. So we're not sure how many times you need to hear a rumour about something before it's confirmed as reality, but definitely watch this space for sustainability requirements gaining a stronger presence in government procurement. So we just wanted to highlight a few of the material issues that we're seeing turn up in New Zealand that have implications for business and supply chain integrity. So labour rights. The issue of labour rights and ensuring your procurement practices are not fueling economic disparity and poverty have been a high focus for SBC members. We're really proud of our member Vector. They became the first corporate business to become an accredited living wage employer in November last year. They pay all their staff the living wage and have worked with all of their subsidiaries, contractors and suppliers to adopt the same approach. A similar issue is modern slavery. Someone is classified as being in slavery if they're forced to work, their freedom of movement is restricted by an employer, or they're bonded to pay off debt. And it's estimated there are 3,000 people working in slavery in New Zealand. And that's just the cases that we've got a good handle on. So be really aware of how this could play out in the different layers of your supply chain. Having a deeper knowledge in relation to particular areas of potential risk often requires an organisation to go beyond self-assessment alone. So not only is it becoming easier for people to find out about human rights infringements, it's also getting harder for businesses to plead ignorance and distance themselves from the behaviours of others in the supply chain. We've heard from experts in New Zealand that issues of underpayment and debt and threats of rights and deportation are most common in New Zealand in hospitality and the cleaning, agricultural and horticultural sectors. An example from just a few weeks ago saw the hospitality chain Mercure placed under investigation for abusing the rights of their staff. 6 students claimed they were underpaid, overworked if they complained, and were threatened with deportation. They had travelled from India to New Zealand on 6-month fixed-term contracts as part of their placement for their hospitality degrees and contracted by a cleaning company. So it's going to remain to be seen what happens with this case, but it's all too common example where a lack of rigour applied to workers contracted on the behalf of a company has had a negative outcome. But there are different ways that businesses could approach auditing their supply chain if they do at all. MB refer to 3 levels. So they say you can have an internal audit where the supplier conducts an audit of its own business and its suppliers. You could do a procurer audit where you as the procurer audit the supplier. And then thirdly, a third-party audit which involves the supplier being independently assessed by another company. Could we ask for a show of hands just to see if anyone has used a third party? Okay. If you've used a third party to get independent assurance, okay, that's good. Awesome. And this is definitely something to consider if you have multiple tiers of subcontracting in the supply chain and your interaction is 1, 2, or more steps removed from direct engagement with supplier businesses. And apart from what we'll cover today, there are other organisations that can advise business on what to do, such as Employment New Zealand, and depending on your sector, some of the industry bodies, such as Chartered Accountants Association New Zealand, are looking at how this impacts their networks. So plastics. This issue has emerged rapidly. It's now considered to be a hygiene factor issue because it's so visible downstream in the value chain. China's move to stop accepting our plastic from recycling has made responsible disposal much more problematic. So this is a great example of the need to consider the full value chain rather than just responsible disposal downstream. The Flight Plastics Recycling Facility, which opened its recycling part in Lower Hutt last year, is demonstrating an opportunity to start to build resilience within New Zealand rather than rely solely on international markets. Provides New Zealanders with the option of seeing their recycled plastic back on supermarket shelves. Plus, with the extension of the landfill levy to all landfills next year, increased costs will be a significant driver to a change in business practice. Depending on your business, this could mean taking a full life cycle approach that could involve sourcing alternatives for plastic packaging. And for all businesses, waste disposal costs will increase, making minimisation and diversion from landfill a cost-saving exercise at the very least. And I'm sure we'll hear more on this topic from Kerry later on. And finally, emissions. Climate change is a significant economic issue of our time. It's having an impact on business through disruption, cost, and environmental damage. And businesses are working with suppliers to explore emission reduction in their own supply chains. This is taking the form of getting a comprehensive understanding of suppliers' emissions as a result of operations to service the business. Then, reduced emission targets are agreed and are being built into service level agreements and contracts. And in New Zealand, we've seen a really strong signal from the Climate Leaders Coalition. They outline why climate action is important to their businesses. And one of the three activities that they've committed to working on is working with suppliers to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And this is really quite powerful in a New Zealand context, given how interconnected our market is. And you can see from the slide we're up to over 70 signatories now. So as the number of signatories grows, some suppliers could start to receive requests from multiple clients who are members of the coalition. So I'd just like to provide a quick run through of the work that we did with our freight efficiency group. Probably one of the most fun pieces of work I've done with SBC, which I'm surprised that I say now, having never worked in procurement before. So when the guys said, "Oh, Kate, let's develop some sustainable freight procurement guidelines," I kind of had to do a big gulp, but luckily they were all very generous with their time at giving me Procurement 101, and it was just quite an interesting kind of learning period of my working career. So it probably took us a year in total to start the guidelines and get them published. So yeah, it was definitely not a quick piece of work, and it really gave me appreciation for how much is involved when you are procuring. So what's great about our freight group is they're a really neat mix of freight owners like Lion, Office Max, and The Warehouse, freight carriers like New Zealand Post and Toll, and key points of infrastructure in the freight network, so Ports of Auckland and Auckland Airport. So we found that when we were having these discussions, it was quite nice to have each element of the freight network kind of represented around the table. So they identified procurement as a key driver for their sector. They felt that the industry had continued to screw each other down on price year after year after year, and the race to the bottom wasn't going to benefit anyone in the long term. And they wanted to use procurement to send a key message to the industry that as big purchasers of services, they would no longer simply pay the cheapest cost. They would use the power of themselves as the customer to seek out the best value. So we worked with them to create procurement guidelines for sustainable freight so that things like health and safety, environmental benefits, innovation, standardization, and greater transparency on performance could be considered. So the first step for the group was really to get the right principles in place. So what exactly was it that we were trying to do? What did we want a change in the procurement process to achieve? So it was agreed that the purpose of the guidelines were to reduce emissions and to support service providers who had sustainability credentials. And so this was really useful when we had to decide what actually did go into the guidelines, because there's always a tendency to ask a lot of information from suppliers. So if you're really clear on your purpose of what your procurement process is trying to do, it means that you should only be asking for information from them that serves that objective, because it's a waste of time if you're asking for information that you won't actually use. And the people that we were working with were the supply chain and logistics managers from freight-owning companies. So they were the right people because they had autonomy over the purchasing decisions that were being made and the processes that they were being used. But we did identify having to influence people and procurement teams as being a potential barrier in some organizations. So these, of course, are the words of the group and not my own, but procurement managers are, by their nature, people who like process and like rigor. They're often well-practiced at continuous improvement and always looking for opportunities to better their processes. And they already feel like there's a level of robustness about what they do. So if someone comes along and suggests making a change, their first response could be, it ain't broke, we don't need to fix it. Plus, there's quite a strong culture around long-term supply contracts. So I have a long, positive relationship with my current supplier. They understand me. No one could do any better. Which is, of course, a really understandable position. Important just to acknowledge that sometimes as well there are other perks that the relationship represents to the individual and not necessarily the organization as a whole. So this is where transparency is helping to address some of that. And of course, a very real issue is split incentives. So changing a procurement process to create more value is, of course, the right thing to do. But ultimately, the individual's KPIs were still based on cost savings to the business alone. So we're starting to see some great examples of balanced internal scorecards for sustainability and also having sustainability better reflected in organizations' reward and recognition programs. But it's still quite a big leap for businesses, particularly in the freight sector. So we discussed our approach, and we knew that there was a key stakeholder group that we had to involve, and this was the freight carriers themselves. So we wanted to make sure that what we were asking them was realistic. So we invited the current suppliers of the people involved in the group to a workshop. We presented them with the draft guidelines, and we asked them for their feedback. I say that like it was really simple, but for me it was quite daunting because not all of those freight carriers were SBC members, and this is a sector that's fiercely competitive, right? So yeah, I remember being quite nervous that morning, and we basically just had to lay out the ground rules and say, guys, this is the big picture, this is what we're trying to do. It's long term, it's about benefiting everyone. And you know, I was really relieved because there weren't many tricky conversations once we got past price, and it wasn't as confrontational as I thought it was going to be. And it kind of made me reflect that it's kind of the same when, as a business, you start to do your stakeholder engagement exercise and you go out and start engaging with stakeholders, and you think, you know, people are going to just be up for giving you a really hard time, but then you're actually pleasantly surprised because people actually value that you've asked their opinion, and they're grateful to have the conversation and really pleased that their input has been sought. So the guidelines are structured to be able to use at any stage of the procurement process. They include a really long list of things that can be discussed with potential suppliers or current suppliers, you know, whether you're renegotiating contracts or you're just going out to tender, or you're about to do that really long lead-in to a formal tender process. My sense was that the majority of the group weren't actually looking to change their provider, but they knew that when they were doing their renegotiations, using the guidelines would be a good opportunity to strengthen their existing relationships and what was put into their contracts. And again, because everyone's procurement process was completely different, it wasn't a case of just developing a template for the guys. So the guidelines include possible line items that you could put in your tender process that demonstrate the activities that were being looked for and the other factors that would help meet the objectives. We did do a sample weightings table. So, you know, we were dedicating weightings to the sustainable procurement credentials that we were looking for. I don't have visibility over how far the guys have gone with actually using this weightings table. It's my disclaimer. But what they did agree to do is they developed a set of common requirements that they would all ask for, and that's Appendix A of the guidelines. So they said, out of all these things, as a group, we agree we are all going to ask for this list at minimum, because that sends a really clear signal to the providers that if they want to do this, these are the most important things to all of us. So, as we know from the value chain, emission reduction from logistics is a really key opportunity for most businesses because of the multiple interactions that it has with the value chain. So, using the guidelines could be a good place to start. The checklist of sustainable freight elements is all in there, and you just need to decide what you want to include as part of your own procurement process. Are there any questions on that before we move on?
Hi, it's great to, sorry, it's Chuhi from Vector, by the way. Thanks so much for explaining about the guidelines and how they came about, because I've only just seen the guidelines themselves, and it's really interesting to hear that context. I was wondering, was Main Freight involved in the process, and what about those companies who weren't involved, and how might we influence them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So our invitation to the freight carriers group that we wanted to test the draft with was made by the freight owners themselves. So they got in touch with their, their relationship managers directly. Main Freight were down to join us, I think, as countdown supplier until the day before, and then they didn't come at the last minute. And forgive me, because it was a couple of years ago now, but I think I did have a chat to the guy, and he just explained that they have just quite a non-collaborative culture. It's just the way they do things. They like to be out there, and, that's fine, and that's okay. And I think I just took heart from the other carriers that were in the room as well. So I was saying to Richard from Becker before, the health and safety manager at Limfox hugged me at the end of our workshop. And he said, I'm just so grateful that we've had the chance to talk about these things that really matter. And I think it's just that really kind of similar token that, you're doing this work day to day in your businesses, but it's actually quite beneficial to just kind of be lifted out of that and be surrounded by other people with the same roles. So, if the Main Freight guys ever decide that they want to, play, we're totally up for it. Thanks, Judy. All right, so now it's great to be able to hand over and hear another first-hand account. I'm going to introduce Kerry Hannafin. Kerry is the General Manager of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at Countdown. So Kerry's going to give you a presentation, and then there'll be time for questions for her at the end of her presentation. So please join me in welcoming Kerry.
Ngā mihi kia koutou. Thank you, Kate. The thing that stood out from what you talked about then was that when you noted that procurement managers are all about the rigour, and my heart sunk because I'm not about rigour at all. Unfortunately, I guess, because yesterday it confirmed that I'll be taking over this part of our business as well. So I'm currently in charge of sustainability, but all I do is just tell people what to do. I'm like, you must do this, and you need to be better, and we're going to roll out, and we're going to ban stuff, and now I actually have to be into the rigour. So my heart. So I need some team. So my call out to you is anybody who's interested to come to work for me. We've got a whole lot of stuff to do. No jokes, it's really big. So yeah, I am the General Manager of Sustainability, and we have a very unorthodox approach at Countdown because I lead it, and I'm a bit unorthodox and kind of a bit scattergun. But in terms of this world, in terms of the way that we're procuring, particularly around ethical sourcing, with food and with labour, we are very, very rigorous. Obviously, I had nothing to do with writing it, but I oversee it. And in terms of plastic, which I'll talk on as well, we're just beginning to really get a handle on that. It's very, very difficult here in New Zealand, but we're so deeply committed. Now, I'm terrible at slides. Right, I'm terrible at slides, but just a little bit of a background for you. I'm not a retailer. I've never worked in supermarkets or in any retail business in my entire life. Oh, I lie. I started off in a supermarket when I was 15. Back in the day when, there was no electric scanning, you just had to do it all by, like butter, 144, whatever. And I had gave zero cares about it. And if I didn't know the number, I just would give it away for free. I'd be like, one for you, one for us. And on my first day at Countdown, so I'm on the exec team, there's 9 of us, and that was my story. I'm like, I'm a retailer, here's my story. And I proudly told the story of, my first day in a supermarket where I just gave quite a lot of it away. And I was so proud. And now if I was in the supermarket, I'd give it away to people who I thought needed the food. I'd be like, you look like you need that, it's for you. And I could see the colour drain off their faces. And because I get nervous and anxious, I thought, I'll just keep talking. I'll just keep talking through the story, thinking they're loving it, but they're not loving it. They're shaking their heads, looking at me like, what have we done hiring this cowgirl? And usually everyone who starts in our business, you have to go to store for 5 days and learn the trade, but I'm the only one who's never ever been allowed into the store. Which it's a trigger for me because, actually where we deliver our services is in store, but they won't let me anywhere near the checkout. So, there you go. Right. Oh, I've moved on. Has anyone ever heard, I roll this speech out so often now. Has anyone heard me? I know Victor have. Did I do the slide? Okay, so plastic. I cannot tell you how much New Zealanders care about plastic. We're absolutely all over it as a country, and that's an incredibly cool thing because it's an issue. What's really surprising is this, obviously it's a global issue. In 2015, Greenpeace didn't even have a plastics group. In 2016, they sort of ran the microbeads campaign, but this is only a few years old, this issue, plastics. Climate change is much more pressing than plastic, but, whatever, images like this and turtles have really sort of caught momentum. You've got governments like the Conservatives in England, I guess it's a distraction from Brexit, they're all over plastics, they're taxing it, they're all, it's fantastic. We need this here in New Zealand, by the way. But in terms of my world, and I look after corporate affairs as well, which is media and government, and I do our food rescue and community stuff. And in the day, we used to get emails about the price of butter and, why is the ham mouldy, kind of food issues. And now we get emails and letters every day and boxes of packaging I get sent to me every day, finished packaging that customers are finished with, that they free post to me. Where's New Zealand Post? Dawn's here? Is Dawn here? No. So they put free posts, so I'm paying for the packaging to come back to me, which is kind of awesome, I guess. # we don't need this packaging campaign. And photos like this sent in to me from kids who are saying, what are you doing as a big conduit of plastic in New Zealand to make it better? And a little child sent this in to me, and it's a seahorse in Indonesia. In Indonesia now, there is probably, in the waters around islands like Bali, there is probably more inorganic material than organic material. And this is a seahorse who would have, back in the day, I say this like I'm 80, back in the day, travelled, what do you call it, ride the waves on seaweed, and now they're riding the waves on cotton buds. And I have this in I printed it out and put it by my desk because it's such a reminder of what our legacy will be. Like, is my legacy going to be to sell you butter? Not at all. My legacy is to leave this place better than we found it, to be a business, and we're huge. We serve 3 million Kiwis a week. We've got 19,000 team. Our legacy is to be much better, to cause no more harm, to actually enhance our environment, to do better by our team and do better by our communities. And if this is not a reminder to me about the responsibility I have in terms of procurement and everything else we do, then I don't know what is. So 40% of the global plastic that's being produced is being used in consumer goods. So it started in 1950, and back in the day, it's actually a really handy product, plastic. It's everywhere. It's our phones, it's in hospital equipment, it's in cars. But now we're at the stage where we're using, natural resources, finite natural resources, to produce something that we use in consumer goods for sort of a minute or so, and then we discard it. We have a scheme in New Zealand, the soft plastic scheme, which is at the brink of collapse. We have all diligently and in good faith recycled our soft plastics for a couple of years now. That's going nowhere. That soft plastic is in storage. We cannot find an end of it, and I urge you all as big businesses in New Zealand to see what you can do about finding a market for an onshore solution for soft plastics. But it is untenable for me that we in good faith are asking Kiwis to recycle soft plastics, and there is nowhere for it to go. There is nowhere for it to go in New Zealand, there's nowhere for it to go in the world. We have to turn the tap off. We cannot just rely on recycling with plastic. We have to actually stop producing it, and I think it's time for the government to stand up and because I talk to suppliers a lot and ask them whether they're interested, in going on a journey with me around reducing plastic in our business, and they're very reluctant because of cost. But actually what we need is some regulatory signals that actually enough is enough, because we are buckling under the weight of this. So in terms of what we can do around plastic in our procurement, what we've decided is our bottom line is we don't want it. Where we can avoid plastic, that's our first principle, is if you can supply us a grocery item without plastic, that is our preference. And this year we have taken, tons and tons, about 100 tons out of plastic out of produce, because it's obvious, it's the place where we can own it and where it starts. And we're going across category by category where we can to remove it. It's super hard because we do so well and then we get a needle in a strawberry, and I'm under pressure to put packaging back on packaging to keep it safe for consumers. So how do you balance my absolute obligation to provide New Zealanders with food that is safe, that you can trust me or us to take home and feed to your children for lunch without needles in it, but also provide you food in a way that's not kind of crippling our environment? So this is a balance that we need to make. So our first ask of suppliers is to avoid packaging plastic, where you can. The second is to reduce it. You'll see in our shops, there's no Griffin's biscuits here, before I go on, no. Griffin's biscuits, the double wrapped, triple wrapped ginger nuts that are just all over the show with plastic, they can probably provide that to New Zealanders in a way that is not so full of plastic. My favourite, we've just talked about it, is the Watties 3 baked beans, wrapped in plastic. What on earth is that about? Tins are the most beautiful product to recycle. There's not a tin that's existed that hasn't been recycled. It's a perfect circular piece of packaging. I asked the chief executive of Watties whether they'd consider taking the plastic off the 3 tins, because it's better for us to sell single and it's better for him, and he said no. So what do? We need to tax Watties. Don't write this down. Are we live streaming to Watties? Just joking. Oh God, I forgot. See, rogue and no rigour. I need to write. No, I've got notes, but I need to read them. Okay. Just kidding. Okay, so packaging, avoid, reduce where we can, and then actually rather than relying on recycling as the third step, we actually want to have packaging that we can reuse. And so we're looking at whether we can have more BYO, containers in our stores, which is what our customers are really asking for. We've got difficulties around how we can guarantee food safety because we own all of our stores centrally. If we've got if you buy your coleslaw off me in your BYO container and you get sick, we can't work out whether it's your container or our coleslaw, so we'd pull 200 stores worth of coleslaw, and that would be very difficult with the supplier, cost tens of thousands of dollars in the audit. So we're trying to work out whether we can negotiate with the government around a way that we can let New Zealanders bring their own containers, or we can produce with companies like Flight containers that you can use and use again rather than recycling, because recycling is losing. Let me tell you, that is a fact. But if we can't avoid, reduce, reuse, we're looking at recycling, and where we can, as a business, we're committing to using products that are made in New Zealand. So we've just swapped $1 million worth of bakery recycling products to be procured out of Flight Plastics in Wellington. We were getting it done for cheap out of Thailand. We're paying probably double the price to get it made in New Zealand, but it's the right thing to do, and it's just one category, it's just baking. And then it gets worse, obviously, around after recycling. It's recoverable, and most of the stuff that we're putting in our blue bins in Auckland is recoverable, but it's not recyclable. We're only recycling about 14% in New Zealand. And then, of course, there's the stuff that we dispose. And if you think about what's going into the soft plastics, most of that's disposed because we're contaminating it. So we're in a bit of a quandary, and our obligation as a retailer, and Frontiera here, all of us as suppliers and retailers need to be much, much better at how we are procuring the packaging we're using, and also how we're participating in the end-of-life solution for it. The real difficulty we have is that there isn't many options in New Zealand. Compostables is not viable because we don't have on-scale compostable end-of-life solutions. We don't think biodegradable products are right. We've taken biodegradable rubbish bags, oxy-degradable, degradable rubbish bags off our shelves because we don't think they're right for New Zealand, and we're certainly not going to put products on our shelf that are misleading. So, and I guess that's another thing for people like us. We're getting amazing products brought into us with trees and children and unicorns and balloons, and apparently it's amazing and it's earth-saving and preserving, and these certificates are great, they're like audited up the wazoo, but when you actually scratch the surface and we do our due diligence, and that is, we're doing way more due diligence than we ever have, the stuff is no good. There's chemicals in it that are, anyway. So actually our obligation, we're taking it very seriously. We need help with working out what's right and what's not, but certainly this is not something we as a business can do on our own. We need partners, the government, we need other businesses, because we've all got the same issue, right? You've got vector shrink wrap stuff going on, we've got the same stuff, that stuff's single use. We have to work together to find a solution that's fit for purpose for New Zealand. Okay, so that's plastic, so that's great. Right, so in terms of how we approach procurement, what we did is we set up we established 20 goals that we aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN developed in 2015. Probably many of you have got the same kind of process, yes? Yep, cool. So we split them into 3 groups. So what we're doing around being sustainable for our team, and that's pretty much that we want you to come to work to be your whole self, to only have to work one job. It's not okay in New Zealand that you've got to work 3 jobs to pay the rent and feed your children. No, not okay. So we want to be a business where that's not what you have to come to work and be one of your jobs. We want to share our prosperity with the communities we operate in. But I want to talk to you mostly around the planet stuff, which is around our approach to being more circular in New Zealand, but also around how we procure our goods that we sell you every day. I'm just going to read from because my eyes are so bad I can't read the computer, so I'm going to read from this book that we launched last night. So we've done a couple of things in terms of procurement. So our aim principally is to procure out of New Zealand because air miles, number one, we've got more control of the quality, and also we really want to grow the New Zealand economy. So we have about 1,500 relationships with New Zealand farmers. About 100% of our chicken, pork and lamb is procured in New Zealand, about 97% of our beef and seafood, and about 80% of our vegetables and fruit is from New Zealand. And we get the mangoes and the pineapple and bananas obviously that come in, but mostly where we can we buy in New Zealand. And we think in terms of kind of environmental sustainability, that's kind of the best starting place. But then of course we bring in raw materials and commodities from all over the world. And we're focusing on some areas which we think are high risk, and that is sugar, chocolate, tea and coffee, pulp and paper, and palm oil. And as you'd expect, like all responsible retailers, we've got all sorts of certifications and international standards that we adhere to. And because we're big, we're part of a Trans-Tasman group. We're really advanced on that. We're doing we're doing well. We're kicking all sorts of goals. Which is good and right, because none of us want to buy products that's from deforested land. But the stuff I really want to talk to you today around is the modern slavery stuff, which is where we've kind of put our focus in the last couple of months. So, as you said, we've got around 3,000 modern-day slaves in New Zealand, and it's many of them will be in the supply chain that Countdown is involved with. There's the nail bar workers. I didn't get these done in a nail bar. I've got a child who does it, so she's my modern-day slave. Child labour, but she's my child, so I think it's okay. Rachel, I'm looking at you because she knows my daughter. So it's nail bar workers, it's restaurants, and it's horticulture, it's pickers, it's viticulture, so we are very exposed there. And we've had a policy in place since 2009, which is looking at how we source goods, but we've been worried that it's not robust enough. And it's not just New Zealand, we've got, Woolworths are enormous, they've got 200,000 team, and their supply chain goes right across Asia because they sell clothes as well. So, and of course we bring in stuff from Southeast Asia as well. So we wanted to make it more robust and more in line with the Modern Slavery Act that's enacted in Australia. So we relaunched our policy in July this year, and pretty much it's simply this. We do not want one single item in our business that's been produced by someone who has been harmed in that production. Like, it's simply not okay. So if I've got you selling me, tuners and growers selling me tomatoes, I now want to know who you're subcontracting to, and if they're subcontracting, who they're subcontracting to, right to the very end of the supply chain. And to be completely honest, we have no idea. It's a complete unknown for us. So we're just beginning to work with every single one of our suppliers around the New Zealand supply chain. We've got two lots of suppliers, the Cokes of the world, who have to adhere to the policy. They're kind of there already. And then we have our own brand suppliers, or our exclusive suppliers, and the onus on them, or the robustness around our expectations on them are much, much higher. What we did is we looked at global best practice, and in supermarkets it was Walmart and Tesco. We used a global, probably the leading global responsible sourcing agency called Elevate to help us look at what is the best practice when it comes to ethical sourcing, particularly to deal with modern day slavery. And we did it group-wide, so we've got impact at scale, and we did a risk matrix. So we know that some sectors like horticulture, some countries like Thailand and China are much more risky for us, and we basically did a kind of matrix around risk, which is our starting base. And here in New Zealand, because we really simply do not know what's going on, you hear stories about the kiwi fruit pickers, or free-range eggs is quite a big issue for us, and we get in there and start doing audits. But actually what we want is a broad-brushed approach where every single supplier to us knows where we stand, what our expectations are, and that we're not here to stop the relationship. If we find an incident that we're not happy with, then our intention is to go in and help remediate, because we certainly don't want to cause more harm to the worker. If we close that farm down, or we stop buying their product, and those workers are more harmed, that's no good either. So we'd pay the wages, we'd help. So our intention is not to be punitive, but to actually be to build up an economy whereby none of us feel okay about modern day slavery happening in our country. And I think part of our responsibility is to realise we need to pay prices that suppliers can live with. If they're cheating the system because we're not paying properly, then we need to stand up and meet them halfway. So a lot of it's on us, but a lot of it's on our suppliers as well. And there's some practices that are, quite frankly, unacceptable in New Zealand. None of us will feel proud about. We've gone and widely talked to our customers, and as I said, we've got 3 million of them around what they think about it. And I was just saying to Kate, New Zealand modern day slavery is not a word that we kind of like. It's very confronting. It sounds like something that happens in Southeast Asia. But when you talk about whether you're okay with New Zealand, people living in New Zealand getting $1 an hour, or in fact paying $10,000 back for the transport they got to come to New Zealand, no one feels okay about that. We're very fair in New Zealand. We want to be good buggers. This is the language we use. And if you get it down to what matters to us as people, this matters. And so we're on a journey now with our suppliers, doing a whole lot of stuff, training. We've done training. We're doing one-on-one sessions. We're doing controlled audits. We're doing unannounced audits. We've got third-party engagement where it's not appropriate for us to come in. We're not just simply looking at the data they give us. We're going in and doing unannounced interviews with team in whatever languages, their team in whatever languages they speak. We're asking to look at their bank accounts to make sure they're getting paid, not a third party. So we're really taking it seriously, and it's a very comprehensive program of action. But I'm the first to admit we're just really beginning, but we have a very, very, which I'm happy to share with any of you who want it, a really, really robust policy in place with standards and procedures and information for all of us to get it right and to do the right thing together, because again it's about collaboration and doing the right thing. Just in terms of our two focuses are on employment methods. So we've had incidents that we've heard about where people have paid to come to New Zealand, they've paid for the job, they've paid for the room, so they're not earning a cent a week. We're looking at whether team in the subcontracted world can move freely, whether they're free to leave the premises, all of that kind of stuff. Which obviously makes perfect sense, right? We've got a memorandum of understanding with the union around that when they know of things that they tell, all of that stuff, the kind of hygiene stuff. But we're also really looking at whether there's mechanisms of grievances in place in all of our suppliers. So i.e. that grievances can be raised, that they can be raised and heard in a transparent way, that there are processes in place that all workers are treated fairly, like New Zealanders treated one way and Pacific Island pickers treated another, absolutely not okay. So that's the kind of focus for us, because we think it's where we can make the most impact. And as I say, we're focused also on corrective action as opposed to punitive, because we actually want to protect the most vulnerable, and punitive action in terms of procurement is unfortunately gets the worst results. So there you go. Anyone want to come work for me? A lot to do. Sorry, Watties, I feel really bad now.
I'll come and work for you. Are there any questions for Kerry? I'm sure there are lots of questions for Kerry.
Yes. Hi, I'm David Benatar from the Warehouse Group.
Oh, hi.
Hello. Congratulations.
You do great work yourselves.
Yes, thank you. So you have a wide portfolio of programs in sustainability and procurement.
Yes.
What's the size of your team, and what's the way of working so that you can really influence what's done in all the functions?
I have done it myself this year, a team of one, which has been it's been like a night job for me. And because I've got a team that do all of the other work for us, which is like our food rescue program, for example. I've got quite a big team, but I've led sustainability myself this year, and I've been really focused on plastic bags. So now I'm just beginning to recruit a team. We've got one packaging person in the business. I've just inherited yesterday the team of quality specialists, and there's about 12 of them who are the ones who kind of do the everyday auditing. But that's not just around sustainability or ethical supply chain, it's around quality. Obviously, we check for ingredient, we've got to verify every ingredient, every claim. That's the team that does that. So as we make more commitments in the space, we need to obviously resource it. So we're just beginning to catch our breath and do that. It's a significant piece of work, and because we have so many suppliers, we need to grow our team quite rapidly, which is why I'm asking for the third time now if anyone wants to come work for me. It's really good fun. 5% off groceries. Crazy boss. Anyway, so we've done it. It's been very lean, but I guess you'd not understand that we do stuff so lean. Yeah, it's been quite tough. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jess from Genesis Energy. I have a question about, there are so many things that you could tackle within your business. How do you prioritise? How do you decide this is the thing we're doing right now? I'm a human rights lawyer, so this is personal for me. I spent quite a long time in Guatemala working on procurement working with the local Indigenous communities about how Nestlé were procuring coffee. So this has been in my line of sight for 20 years. So when I got the opportunity to come into a supermarket, I was like, boom. Yeah, I didn't tell them any of this, obviously. So it's a little bit of personal, interest, but also this is definitely what our team feel proud about, and we all want to work for a business that makes a difference. And I think, I guess it's a little bit, we talk to the team about where they see a priority as well. Plastic is because it's obviously so, people can touch it. So it's a little bit of what's the issue of the day and a little bit about where I think we can make a big difference. And in terms of this stuff, I think Countdown actually can probably change the supply chain in terms of employment practices in New Zealand if we put our energy into it, because we're so big in the supply chain in terms of buying food. So to me, it's like, can we make a difference at scale on this stuff? Yep, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Colleen from Tourism Holdings.
Kia ora.
Hi. Just wanted to ask you, would your scope extend to investing in recycling plants, such as glass and plastics and the like? Because that really seems to be the gap. We need something to replace this packaging.
Yep.
But you can't replace it with nothing.
Yeah, I think we're nearly at that stage. I think I'm so loathed to do it. It's tough because in my heart, having end-of-life solutions is just a band-aiding the problem. Like we're desperate to kind of put this stuff somewhere. We're desperate to find somewhere to put plastic. But actually, we've got to stop creating it in the amount we are, because so much of it's completely unnecessary. So yes, we need something, and there isn't something viable. So do we have to stand up and do something? Maybe, because we can't let it fall over. None of us. Is it the right thing to do? I don't know. Yes, because it's desperate, but no, because we need to stop producing it and find a solution, or producing it in such large quantities, I think.
Yes, so that extends to glass and aluminium as well. There are better, at the moment I think
both are much better, right?
Yeah, but at the moment I think we ship a lot of stuff offshore, and there's no solution really in New Zealand.
No, I'm much more, I think, in the plastic's much more of a concern for me, because there's so much of it, and because the aluminium and the glass recyclers are much happier. They're not under as much pressure as the councils are with 1, 2 and 3, and the soft plastic recyclers are. So I guess that's where my focus is. So I think we'll have to do something with others in the industry, but I think actually as a country we need to probably, what did someone say to me the other day? When the tap's overflowing, when the water's coming out of the sink and it's on the ground, do you keep mopping it up or do you pull the plug out? And I think we need to all ask ourselves, what's the right thing to do? We may have to have a couple of years where we're kind of mopping up the problem, but we've got to change, I think. But, maybe I'm just unrealistic. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I'm Catherine from Air New Zealand, and I'm interested in how you, with all of the resourcing up that you're needing to do of auditing your supply chain, working more closely with your suppliers, that process that you just described, which sounds significantly strengthened.
Yeah.
What are you seeing as the solution in terms of the mix, strengthening capability in procurement, having more sustainability specialists in the company, enlisting more support from third-party auditors? How are you sort of seeing that kind of solution balanced across those different areas?
I think actually it's probably a little bit of all of the, building capacity in our business. We use third parties a lot, obviously, because also there's something around independence. Like, it's not just us versus supplier, it's like a third party's involved as well. So there's some credibility to that, and also it takes, it helps our relationships, of course, because we don't want to get into difficult relationships. But actually what's going to make a difference is if our suppliers as well have sustainability as part of their DNA. That actually, as businesses, we all agree that there's a right and there's a wrong way to do stuff. And then, if it's just your principle to do the right thing, every business, then we know this work's going to get a lot easier. But we are, working with, as you will be as well, I imagine, who have not even thought about this, because they're so busy actually just, growing bok choy or whatever it is to get to us. So I think we have a really big obligation to empower our suppliers, especially the little guys who work so hard and, don't have any time at all to think about this stuff, to help them have the tools within their own businesses to do the right thing. So we really want to not make it hard, but make it easy. So part of it's also definitely building capacity amongst our New Zealand suppliers particularly.
Yep. Thanks.
Josephine.
You also do great work in New Zealand. Yeah, well done on the single-use plastics. Yeah. I take my keep cups on the plane, and I'm sure the flight attendants roll their eyes at me. That's some feedback, like, oh, here's another one, like with my keep cup.
Thanks, Kerry. My name's Josephine. I'm with Environmental Solutions. Thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, really inspiring, so thank you. It's clear that you're a real game changer. How would you say, with being a part of Woolworths, are you sort of pushing their boundaries, or are they also leading the way? And what, if they're not, what can you do?
I think Woolies are very strong on supply chain procurement, but they've got the Modern Slavery Act, so that's the law. We're way ahead on plastic in New Zealand. Our customers are much more demanding around environmental moves in our supermarkets and in Australia. Australians, it's amazing because they did bags this year as well, and it was a shocker for them over there. Like there was strangulations at the checkout and terrible. But here it was really good. So I think there's a different appetite. But in terms of this world, we're the same, and they help us a lot because they're so big, and obviously they've got the big relationships into Asia. Environment, we're way ahead. Packaging, we're way ahead. Probably in terms of our people, sustainable community stuff, we're so small we can get stuff done. So we've got community, like food rescue in all of our stores. They haven't quite yet. I think it's just around being small and agile. So we're ahead. It's great to be ahead, I have to say. I rub it in. Yeah.
Kerry, I have a question from our live stream audience. This is from Rachel at L'Oreal. She asks, around ethical audits, how do you manage suppliers who refuse an audit?
So we've had this. I guess not many do, to be honest, because most people want to do business. If they refuse, we go in unannounced. We just go in if we're concerned. But we have to have a good basis. Like there's obviously due diligence. If we're concerned, we wouldn't ourselves. We get our third party to go in. Yeah. Yes, hi.
Hi, my name is Sui. I'm from Croxley, part of Office Max. I'm the sourcing manager. I also manage the ethical sourcing for the group. So mine is more like a questions, suggestions per se.
Yeah.
So for example, Woolworth would have thousands of suppliers.
Yep, thousands.
Same with Warehouse Group as well. A lot of these suppliers that we all share we were using all of the same supplier.
Yep.
And from costing point of view, a supplier would have to do like 4 different kinds of certifications to get sustainability, social compliance, all of this. So the questions or the suggestions that I was thinking, and I'm really interested to be part of it, is how do we transcend, if we're all for the greater good, how do we all share information around, as long as it's non-competitive, no conflict of interest, how do I use your report that you already verified that this supplier is good, that I trust that we have done the group, and we have done our part as well. So can I use other people's certifications?
Yes.
Yes. So
we do. We have we've got 6 certifications that we accept that are global. So that if you've got, say, global grasp, that's fine with us. We won't re-audit you. But absolutely, if this is pre-commercial stuff, let's work together. So I can give you all of our standards and policies. I'm happy to give that to you. It's public anyway. But this stuff is actually pre-commercial, and you're absolutely right. How do we make it easier for all of us to engage? Make it simpler for suppliers who have done it for you, say, Office Max, to now do it for us, to get stuff, because once we put costs on, that's when we see bad behaviour. So you're absolutely right. And I think we're not very good at that in New Zealand, but with this stuff and with packaging, I think we could do much more together. You're absolutely right.
So if there's a group or information sharing that we can all be part of, then like I said, we have some supplier that we do our own audit as well. It has been certified by our own certifications. If we understand each other's standards, as long as I can use, for example, this supplier have already an audit from warehouse, I can talk to someone from the warehouse group that say, hey, I verified this audit is valid, then I can continue to trade. So it will save costs, and it's actually just for... in the end, it's all cost. We're all here for the business.
Right, absolutely.
But we want to do it right and do it easy and most cost effectively.
Yep, totally agree.
Where do we go from here? Who do we set up? Who do I talk to?
Oh, you want to start a group?
No, not me, but
the group. But yes, absolutely. And if you need, I'm happy to give this to you. But we probably need to do something as a group. But I think this is the right vehicle.
Can we thank Kerry, please? I feel like I should put my hand up to volunteer to be SBC's program manager on the SBC Sustainable Suppliers. Let's take that really seriously on board. I think what I do is just ask you to drop myself or Alison a line as a member if you're genuinely interested in us thrashing out what that might look like, because it feels like there's a lot of value. Awesome. For the last part of the workshop, our proposal is that we just take you through some of the options for possible ways to start or ways to progress. One of SBC's strategic objectives is to make it really easy for members to undertake sustainable business practice and go further with their sustainability. So because no 2 procurement processes are the same, You'll always have a unique mix of drivers and variables in your own business. And there are also a vast number of tools and frameworks out there to help you do this. So we've written a quick guide. It gives you an overview of the different tools and frameworks, gives you links of where to go. It's not exhaustive, but really it's just a summary of what we're aware of and also what our members have been telling us that they've been engaging with. We've also done another quick guide on emissions measurement and management, which we produced earlier this year. And in that guide, you can find out information about services and products that help you with emissions in the supply chain as well. Both of the guides are available on the SBC website, and we'll make sure you get the links. And something that we've also been asked, but we won't go into it in a lot of detail, is what if you need a particular product that only one company makes? And so in this case, we think this is about the relationship that you have with that provider. It's likely to be an enduring, long-lasting relationship. So it's a great opportunity to have a discussion about what your shared long-term objectives are. Do you have shared interests from an environmental or social perspective? And quite often, a good place to start is just sit down, have a conversation. Are there existing pinch points in your relationship? How do you avoid future risk? Is there a shared objective that you could work together on to create value? So there are a number of different things that could be a next step for you. You might wish to develop or update policies about procurement. Kerry's offered to share their policy, so we'll make sure you get that. You might have some sirens going off about particular aspects of your supply chain that you need to investigate further. You could have ideas for how you can create value or drive efficiencies, and you want to explore them. Or you might need to get more granular about certain aspects of your supply chain. So for today, we've tried to put ourselves in your shoes and identify 3 main scenarios for sustainable procurement in your business that we'll go into in a little bit more detail. So the 3 scenarios are, there's an opportunity for our business to create value using sustainable procurement. Our business needs to be able to analyze and use information about the supply chain in order to minimize risk. Or our business needs to be able to translate information about the supply chain and use it to talk better to clients or consumers. So some ways that you could address scenario 1. You could use SBC's value chain guide to map your value chain and take steps to manage it effectively. The guide is based on a series of 6 steps: mapping the chain, identifying risks and opportunities, assessing your priorities, identifying solutions, developing a project plan, and then implementing the change as business as usual. So if you think you have identified an opportunity, just start with step 4. So this kind of talks you through bringing people together to explore fresh thoughts, new ways of doing things, include internal and external stakeholders, your own procurement teams, business development managers, current suppliers, or subject matter experts from other organizations or sectors. It's really important to make sure that you can demonstrate how your desired outcome or change in procurement aligns with your core business strategy, material issues, or sustainability objectives. And then step 5 kind of walks you through putting together a project plan in place to progress that opportunity. It's really essential that you make your commitment real by assigning a dedicated weighting to the aspect that you're seeking evidence of in your procurement process. This is just really critical to success. And if you're an organization that really enjoys ISO, then there is an ISO standard. It's ISO 20400, and that's guidance on integrating sustainability within procurement. So for scenario 2, if you're looking to minimize risk, it requires you to gain a deeper level of knowledge in relation to particular areas of that potential risk. And this often requires some form of independent verification. The great news is that incorporating requirements for products to carry independently verified labels is a quick way of doing this. recognition of these labels are increasing all the time. You'll be aware of things like fair trade, environmental choice, CMARS, and carbon zero. Here, the hard work's been done for you, and there are supporting resources that come along with these labels that guide you through what these verifications mean and how to apply them in your practice. Keep in mind that some certifications are more robust and transparent than others. Organisations such as ISEAL, a global membership organisation for credible sustainability standards, they exist to certify the certifiers. You could look for products that have undertaken voluntary product stewardship accreditation. This is another good way where they're supporting people and organisations to ensure there's effective reduction, reuse, recycling, or recovery of the product. A great example of this is SBC member Fuji Xerox. They are Ministry for the Environment accredited under their product stewardship scheme, and they offer all of their customers free take-back service for used printer cartridges, drums, and fuses to ensure that they are responsibly recycled rather than sent to landfill. And their process has been audited and verified by Ministry for the Environment. And there are also several tools that offer support for applying robustness to supplier credentials. Third-party assessment is carried out by providers such as EcoVadis and SEDEX. SBC members L'Oreal and DB Breweries use EcoVadis. It's an internationally recognised collaborative platform to access information about suppliers' sustainability ratings for global supply chains. And Lion use SEDEX. It's a global non-profit membership platform for sharing responsible sourcing data on supply chains. It's used by more than 47,000 members in over 150 countries. And it looks specifically at labour rights, health and safety, the environment, and business ethics. And finally, ThinkStep, who are an SBC member as well, they have software and services to help businesses undertake life cycle analysis of products, as well as to report and manage greenhouse gas emissions. So, scenario 3. As consumer demand for transparency and traceability grows, various technologies can help connect the consumer directly with information on aspects of the supply chain and the goods that they buy. And quite often this information is reinforced by assurance and verification standards and labels. And new tools are emerging all the time. Examples include GS1 standards. This helps you single out what really matters. It groups your activity into whether you're trying to identify, capture, share, or use supply chain data, making sure that important information is accessible, accurate, and easy to understand. And the next step is the world of blockchain. So a blockchain is a digital ledger in which any transactions that are made are recorded chronologically and publicly. And this information can't be hacked or altered. Last year, SBC interviewed the managing director of BSD Consulting, Felipe Arango, about how blockchain technology is transforming supply chain transparency and management. Felipe talked about how blockchain is increasingly being used to help businesses map their supply chain, track supply chain activity, manage relationships and impacts, and make smarter decisions which earns trust from consumers. It could even develop towards a system of tokenizing impact that would alter how investment and funding is allocated to business. And just to give you a brief example of what this looks like, because it sounds very complex, it's involving raw materials, so BMW Group and the Chilean copper mining company Codelco. So they signed an agreement to cooperate on a sustainable and transparent supply of copper. Using blockchain, they have visibility of different types of certifications of the copper, such as whether there are measures of carbon footprint or water footprint, community impact, human rights, occupational health and safety, ethics, and traceability of funds. And there are other similar kinds of decentralized, distributed, and public digital ledgers that are being used, which are evolving over time. So it's really likely we'll bring up more stories like this in future SBC workshops. We've included the link to Felipe and his interview in the slides, so please watch it if you want to find out more. And just to give you an example, in New Zealand, Silver Fern Farms, their objective was to build trust with their consumers by being transparent about the animals and farm practices in their food chain. Consumers are linked with farmers through digital technology on the packaging. So you scan a fraud-proof QR code, which is on every pack, and it can be, it shows you what region of New Zealand the product came from, how the farm was operated, what care has been provided for the animals, and the environmental impacts of the farm. And also there's an added benefit, which is that the farmers are using the technology to input information, so there's less kind of human error. It's making the visibility and the quality of that information much stronger for the business as well. So now we'd like to just help you go away with some clear ideas for what your next steps might be. So we hope that giving you three scenarios might help you think about what is next. So what we'd like you to do is work in pairs or groups of 3. Choose the scenario that you think kind of best fits where you're at, where your business is at, or if you want to choose a completely different scenario, that's fine. And we'd like you just to discuss with your partner or in your group of 3 what are the next steps that you might need to take when you go back to your business. What do you need to do next to progress it? And it could involve things like, is there a person that you need to influence or involve? Is it clearly articulating what needs to change for something to happen? Or is it about going and finding a tool or a resource that might help you? So we'd like you to, we're going to spend about 20 minutes doing that. So that's about 10 minutes each if you're in a pair, or 7-ish minutes if you're in a group of 3. And then we'll come and check back in at the end of that time. And for the live stream audience, we just encourage you to do kind of your own personal reflection on what that might look like for your business. And if you want to post what your scenario is and what your next actions are, please use the chat box to do that, and we'll look to see if there are some examples that we can feed into the discussion in about 20 minutes' time. Thanks. It was really nice just to hover around a few tables and hear some of the discussions that were going on. The price word popping up a lot, which is good, you know, because that's some of the real conversations. That's what it takes. So now we've got about 20 minutes left. So what we propose to do is we'd just really like to ask for 3 volunteers, hopefully someone representing each of the 3 scenarios, just to kind of talk through what your chosen next step is and what you think you might need to help you progress it. And I just need to provide you with a microphone. So anyone keen to talk about scenario 1? Did anyone choose scenario 1?
Thank you. Gaston Bruneau, Waste Management, and I had Courtney from Mondial and Pip Best from Ernst & Young. And, well, we had 2 people upstream, downstream in a supply chain, so we quickly got to the conversation around sharing of information. And so scenario 2, analyze, use information. And key at this stage of, you know, for a lot of organizations is around, okay, well, picking up that information, making sure we all have that information available, so it means reporting, sharing, and having the systems and processes in place for that sharing and reporting of information. And, well, going straight to bullet point 2 around, well, what steps we need to take. Well, point 1, who do we need to influence and involve? From a procurement perspective, very much our suppliers. And so easy step, contract to it, and, well, easy as in simple to get to, but then contracting to it is that negotiation and using lever points or using key points in the sourcing process or the life cycle process to to achieve that. We tended to agree there's an opportunity with freight forwarders as a funnel point in the supply chain, or a key point in the supply chain, to perhaps aggregate information and share that information from a variety of sources, whether we're into manufacturing or distribution. And, well, tools and frameworks, well, codes of conduct, certifications, and, of course, contract tools or sourcing tools. So, in a nutshell.
Were there particular types of information that you felt like you wanted to share? Was it around?
It was an in general conversation. We did focus on greenhouse gas emissions, given the freight angle, but it was very much in general, say, what key points our business feels they need. But being in logistics, emissions is a great starting point.
For sure. Thank you, Gaston.
Thanks very much. That's been really good today too, Kate. It's been awesome, thank you. So I'm Michael Leroy-Dice, I'm with Deloitte, and my mate here's Mike Dunphy with Dempsey Wood, and we were talking about Dempsey Wood, who is a construction company, about 400 staff that do earthworking and infrastructure construction around, and it'd be fair to say they're probably reasonably green in this area, and not green from a good way. Green as in cabbage-like, rather than environmentally friendly. But that does mean we have a whole lot of good opportunities, and we've taken a real sort of a basic approach. So we probably don't have any kind of coordinated procurement at all now. So we're going to start off with a bit of a risk versus spend approach and see if we can get the top 20 people that we spend most of our money on. We've spent quite a bit of time doing materiality, so we know the key things that matter to our clients, and we know what's sort of in our sustainability policy. We're going to back work that in against our supply chain and look for the opportunity. And I guess this might, it probably works for a lot of businesses, but particularly with construction and contracting workers, if we can find one or two things where we think we can make some difference, we'll focus on doing those two things really well, rather than spread ourselves off trying to make a whole lot of different sort of effects. We do have a lot of opportunity. This sort of industry, environmental effect is really important, so we think that we'll probably focus on things that reduce our environmental effect, or at least put us in a position that we can reflect the needs of our clients in terms of environmental impact, so things around compliance and that sort of stuff. So it would be good to share information if anybody has any thoughts, and I know that the idea that you had before, I think, is really useful in terms of, I remember years ago, part of the Sustainability Managers Group, we started thinking about if everybody in this room got together and looked and saw what, I don't know, laptops have absolutely no slave labour in them anywhere, and we started sending those kind of signals, as a group we could probably do quite a bit, even in New Zealand. I remember talking to Toshiba about it when I worked for Fulton Hogan 6 or 7 years ago, and Toshiba just about jumped on a plane and flew over here to explain why it was really terrible that we would even start to think that Toshiba would be doing that sort of stuff. But it really drove home to me the fact that if we start asking questions as a group, if Fonterra and Fulton Hogan and Deloitte start asking supply chains the same questions on these things, we actually will have an influence. So we've got a bit of a plan, and we're going to take that through and influence our two company owners and move from there.
Fantastic. Thanks. When can we expect a report back?
Contractors, we're not really big on reports.
Thank you for sharing, that's awesome. Anyone else? We've got time for one more before we move into our wrap-up. If I could just ask Kerry, is there anything that she would add around either of those two kind of actions?
I think we're growing up and realising that there's lots of stuff that we can do outside of the commercial kind of reality of doing business that makes sense, and it makes sense when we join up and do it with others, which is just what you and I were talking about over here, about what we can do together, because it just makes so much more sense. Obviously in New Zealand, in terms of supermarkets, we're super competitive, and we've got very strict laws around how we can talk to each other, so it's difficult for Foodstuffs and Countdown to do stuff together. Probably we could work on plastic, actually, if that could be arranged, but certainly with organisations like the warehouse, that's super easy. But in terms of procurement generally, I think that actually it makes sense for New Zealanders to have some things that we all as businesses adhere to and agree to, because many of us will have suppliers along the way, especially like with freight. We've got, we outsource all of our freight companies like many people here would, so that would make sense where we could collectively have a framework that worked for us all, I think.
Cool, thank you. So we're hearing your message like loud and clear, so I think, as I mentioned before, if your company is interested in maybe taking some of these conversations further around getting more consistency around sustainable procurement and what you're asking for, I think the first thing to do would be to just kind of bring people together and throw a few ideas around. So if you're keen to be involved in that conversation, could you please email either Alison or myself, and we'll look to tee something up. And if there's been a particular aspect that we've touched on today, also please could you let us know, because we're quite happy to put together what we would call one of our tech talks, where we'd get more, we'd kind of drill deeper into that particular topic. So that offer is absolutely on the table as well. So in terms of next steps for SBC, we're really proud to say that the World Business Council for Sustainable Development have partnered with the Smart Freight Centre, and they're currently using our group's work to inform a draft framework for global sustainable freight procurement guidelines. So what I would say is that if any of you are keen to pick those guidelines up and start using them, what that partnership is going to be really interested in soon is stories about how they're being used well, or what some of the issues might be. So here's your business's chance to get some global showcasing around using those guidelines potentially. And we're also bringing together our freight group. We're bringing them back together in July next year to see what the next thing is that they'd like to collaborate on. We also expect to have more information on changing consumer expectations through Alison's work on the Good Life Playbook. And we've also asked some of the signatory companies of the Climate Leaders Coalition to provide us with some case studies that they've started to put case studies up on their website. So we're really keen for the first one to give us a case study about working with emissions, working with their suppliers on emissions. So we're working on that. So it's just been really great to kind of have you all here today and just hear some of the conversations. Kat from Colenso kind of prompted me to think that we missed a really good stakeholder group off when we talked about the drivers and influencers for sustainable procurement, and that's actually your own people internally. So what we're seeing now is the 20 to 30 age brackets, for them, these issues are so important. This is their value set. This is their values base that they bring to work every day. So if, as a business, you're not demonstrating that you're doing this through your own procurement, then they would have some questions for you too, or certainly some expectations about the business walking the talk. So, there's that whole kind of staff attraction and retention piece. So thank you for that, Kat. And with more and more members aligning their strategies and reporting to how their work contributes to the global goals for sustainable development, there is one dedicated SDG, which is SDG 12, that's sustainable consumption and production. So that gives you a really neat opportunity to start referencing this work in a global context. 93% of the world's 250 largest companies are now reporting on sustainability. But we know that it will be their influence on their supply chains using sustainable procurement that will really drive the mainstreaming that we all desire. So thanks for today, and we'll see you soon.